Have you ever walked away from a conversation thinking, "Why did I agree to that?" You felt uneasy, pressured, or subtly guilty, but you couldn't explain why. No shouting, no threats, just a quiet sense that something wasn't right. That's how manipulation usually works. It doesn't look dramatic. It looks polite, reasonable, even caring. Manipulators don't overpower you. They redirect your psychology. They use predictable human tendencies: guilt, fear of conflict, need for approval, desire to be seen as good. In this video, you'll learn 7 psychological tricks manipulators use, and more importantly, how to stop them calmly, ethically, and confidently, without aggression, over-explaining, or guilt. This is education, not therapy or legal advice. And everything you'll learn here is about protecting your autonomy, not controlling others. You're not imagining it. And you're not weak for feeling confused after certain conversations. If manipulation worked only on naive or insecure people, it wouldn't be nearly as effective as it is. In reality, manipulation works best on people who are thoughtful, empathetic, responsible, and self-aware. People who try to be fair. People who listen before reacting. People who don't want unnecessary conflict. That's why it can feel so unsettling. You replay the conversation later and think, "I knew something felt off. So why did I go along with it?" The answer isn't that you lack confidence. It's that your psychology was nudged before your logic had time to respond. Human beings are wired for cooperation. We're social by nature. We want harmony, approval, and consistency. Those instincts are usually strengths. They help teams function, relationships survive, and communities stay connected. But the same instincts can be quietly exploited. Manipulation doesn't usually look like aggression. It looks like pressure disguised as politeness, like guilt framed as kindness, like urgency framed as opportunity, like being reasonable framed as compliance. And because it doesn't feel hostile, your brain doesn't raise alarms. This is especially true for smart people. When something feels wrong, your instinct is often to explain, clarify, or give the benefit of the doubt. You assume misunderstanding, not strategy. That makes sense. In healthy interactions, explanation fixes things. But manipulation doesn't run on misunderstanding. It runs on emotional leverage. Here's an important distinction you need to internalize early. Ethical influence is transparent. Both sides can see what's happening, and both sides benefit. Manipulation hides the advantage. One person gains by quietly steering the other's emotions: guilt, fear, obligation, or self-doubt. This video is not about teaching you how to control people. It's about helping you recognize when your psychology is being used against you, so you can respond calmly and protect your autonomy. And just to be clear, this is educational content, not therapy or legal advice. The goal here is awareness, language, and practical self-defense in everyday conversations. If you've ever been told, "Just be more confident," and felt like that advice missed the point, you're right. Confidence doesn't stop manipulation. Clarity does. Manipulation works in predictable patterns. Once you learn those patterns, the fog lifts. You stop blaming yourself, and you start seeing the structure underneath the interaction. That's what we're doing here. We're going to break down 7 common psychological tricks manipulators use, not by labeling people as bad, but by understanding behaviors. Because this isn't about diagnosing personalities. It's about noticing tactics. And once you can name a pattern, it loses much of its power. Before we go further, quick pause. If you want more people to actually listen when you speak and stop pushing past your boundaries, hit like so this video reaches others who need these skills too. Now, one more thing that matters. Manipulation thrives in silence and self-doubt. When you think, "Maybe I'm overreacting," or "I should be nicer," or it's probably my fault. The tactic is already working. Healthy influence never relies on you feeling smaller, rushed, or guilty. And you don't need to become colder, louder, or more aggressive to protect yourself. In fact, the most effective resistance is often calm, neutral, and unreactive. In the next part, we'll start identifying the first 3 manipulation tactics. The ones that create emotional pressure before you even realize a decision is being shaped. As you listen, don't ask, "Is someone doing this to me?" Ask instead, "Have I ever felt this emotional pull before agreeing to something?" That awareness is where influence ends and choice begins. Let's start breaking down the first 3 manipulation tactics. As you listen, don't focus on who might be doing this. Focus on the pattern, because patterns repeat across workplaces, friendships, families, and relationships. Once you recognize the pattern, the pressure loses its grip. The first tactic is guilt framing. This is when someone turns generosity, effort, or past help into emotional leverage. It sounds like, "After everything I've done for you," or "I wouldn't ask if it wasn't important," or "I guess I just care more than you do." On the surface, it sounds reasonable. Underneath, it's a psychological shortcut. Guilt framing activates the principle of reciprocity, the human instinct to repay favors, but it twists it into obligation. Instead of choice, you feel debt. That's why your body reacts before your mind does. You feel pressure to say yes, not because you agree, but because you don't want to feel like a bad person. Here's the key insight. Gratitude does not equal consent. Ethical influence allows appreciation and boundaries to coexist. Manipulation forces you to choose one or the other. The mistake most people make here is over-explaining. They try to justify why they can't comply. That only feeds the frame, because now you're defending yourself against guilt. A calmer, stronger response separates appreciation from obligation. Instead of saying, "I know you helped me before, but I really can't right now," you say, "I do appreciate what you've done, and I'm not able to agree to this." Short, neutral, no apology. You're not rejecting the person. You're declining the request. The second tactic is false urgency. This one sounds like, "I need an answer right now," or "This won't be available later," or "If you don't decide today, it's gone." Urgency feels practical, but psychologically, it does something very specific. It narrows your attention. When time feels scarce, your brain prioritizes relief over accuracy. You're no longer asking, "Is this right?" You're asking, "How do I make this pressure stop?" Manipulators use urgency to bypass reflection. Here's the ethical line. Real opportunities survive reasonable pauses. Pressure that collapses under time is usually hiding something. The most effective response is not resistance. It's slowing the interaction. You don't argue about the deadline. You acknowledge it, then reclaim choice. A simple calibrated question works well here. A calibrated question is an open-ended how or what question that shifts responsibility back to the other person without confrontation. For example, "How would it make sense for me to decide this without time to think it through?" Or, "What's the downside if I revisit this tomorrow?" Notice what you're doing. You're not saying no. You're exposing the pressure. If the urgency is legitimate, the conversation continues. If it isn't, the tactic weakens immediately. The third tactic is victim positioning. This one is subtle and emotionally heavy. It sounds like, "I guess I'm always the one who gets hurt," or "I must just be asking too much," or "I'm clearly the bad guy here." The goal isn't agreement, it's rescue. Victim positioning hijacks empathy. You stop evaluating the request and start managing the other person's feelings. You agree just to restore emotional balance. And here's the trap. When you explain or reassure, you step into the caretaker role, which reinforces the manipulation. The ethical counter here is labeling without rescuing. Labeling means calmly naming the emotional dynamic you're observing, without judgment. It shows understanding without surrender. For example, it sounds like this feels unfair to you. Or, it seems like you're feeling overlooked. Then you stop talking. You don't fix the feeling. You don't argue it away. You don't change your position. Labeling works because it satisfies the emotional need to be heard, without trading your boundary for peace. Let's pause briefly here. If you believe persuasion should always stay ethical, not coercive, not guilt-based, comment boundaries below. I want to know you're thinking about influence the right way. Now notice the common thread in these first three tactics. None of them rely on logic. They rely on emotional imbalance. Guilt makes you feel indebted. Urgency makes you feel trapped. Victim positioning makes you feel responsible. Manipulation works when you respond to emotions you didn't choose. And the goal is not to harden yourself. It's to stay aware. In the next part, we'll look at 3 more tactics that go even deeper. The ones that subtly distort reality, identity, and choice itself. Once you see those, you'll start noticing manipulation not as something dramatic, but as something predictable. And predictability is power. Part 3. Manipulation Tactics. 4-6. Identity and Reality Distortion. Now, we move into a deeper layer of manipulation. The tactics that don't just pressure your emotions, but quietly distort your perception of reality and identity. These are the ones that leave you doubting yourself long after the conversation ends. The 4th tactic is gaslighting lite. This isn't the extreme, dramatic version people often imagine. It's subtle, polite, almost reasonable. It sounds like, "You're reading too much into this," or "That's not what I meant," or "You're being a little sensitive." Nothing overtly hostile is happening, and that's why it's effective. Psychologically, this works by injecting doubt. You start questioning your memory, your interpretation, your emotional response. And once self-doubt enters, your confidence quietly steps back. Here's why arguing facts usually fails. Gaslighting lite isn't about facts. It's about authority over interpretation. The manipulator isn't saying, "This didn't happen." They're saying, "Your experience of what happened is unreliable." The ethical response is not to convince them. It's to anchor yourself. Instead of debating perception, you ground the conversation in your experience. You say something like, "We may see this differently. This is how it landed for me." Or, "I'm clear on how this felt on my side." Notice what you're doing. You're not asking for validation. You're not arguing reality. You're stating your position calmly and disengaging from the distortion. Gaslighting loses power when you stop trying to win agreement. The 5th tactic is conditional approval. This one feels relational, not logical. Warmth appears when you comply. Distance appears when you don't. Compliments, attention, or inclusion become rewards, quietly tied to your behavior. Psychologically, this taps into intermittent reinforcement. When approval is unpredictable, your brain works harder to earn it. You start adjusting yourself without being asked. This is especially powerful in workplaces, friendships, and relationships where belonging matters. The danger here isn't just compliance. It's erosion of self-trust. You stop asking, "What do I want?" and start asking, "What will keep things smooth?" The ethical counter is consistency. You don't chase warmth. You don't withdraw in retaliation. You stay steady. A simple response might be, "I'm comfortable with my decision." No justification, no emotional bargaining. When approval is used as leverage, neutrality is strength. The 6th tactic is forced choice framing. This is when someone presents only 2 options, both favorable to them, and implies those are the only realities. It sounds like, "So either you help me or I'm on my own," or We can do it my way, or this won't work. Psychologically, forced choices reduce cognitive load. When options are narrowed, your brain feels relief choosing something rather than questioning the frame itself. That's the key insight. The manipulation isn't the options, it's the framing. The ethical response is to reclaim the field of choice. You do that by naming what's missing. You might say, I'm not sure those are the only options. Or, what would a third option look like here? This isn't defiance, it's expansion. When you reintroduce alternatives, pressure drops. The conversation shifts from compliance to collaboration, or it reveals that collaboration was never the goal. Let's pause for a moment. If you want more practical phrases you can actually use in real conversations, not theory, not slogans, type yes in the comments. Now notice the pattern across these three tactics. Gaslighting lite makes you doubt your perception. Conditional approval makes you doubt your worth. Forced choice framing makes you doubt your options. All three aim at the same thing, your sense of agency. And here's the important part. You don't counter these by becoming colder or more confrontational. You counter them by staying grounded, steady, and clear. You don't need to expose manipulation aggressively. You only need to stop participating in it. In the next part, we'll look at the final manipulation tactic, the one that's hardest to spot because it looks like agreement. And then we'll introduce the core principle that ties all of this together. Once you understand that principle, you'll stop reacting instinctively and start responding deliberately. The seventh manipulation tactic is the hardest to spot because on the surface, it looks like cooperation. It's called strategic agreement. This is when someone verbally agrees with you, reassures you, or says all the right things, but their behavior never actually changes. They nod, they empathize, they promise, and then nothing shifts. You leave the conversation feeling hopeful instead of pressured. And that's the trick. Psychologically, strategic agreement exploits the principle of consistency. When someone sounds aligned with you, your brain relaxes. You assume progress has been made, so you soften your stance. You stop enforcing boundaries. You give time, patience, and more chances. But alignment isn't verbal. It's behavioral. Manipulators who use strategic agreement aren't trying to solve the issue. They're trying to delay consequences while maintaining access to you. Here's how it often sounds. You're right. I totally get that. That makes sense. I'll do better. I agree with you. 100%. And then the same pattern repeats. The mistake most people make is continuing to negotiate through words. They keep explaining, reminding, or persuading, hoping clarity will eventually produce change. But clarity already happened. At this stage, the ethical response is to shift your focus from words to observable behavior. Instead of rehashing the issue, you calmly anchor the conversation in outcomes. You might say, I'm glad we agree. What will be different going forward? Or, what specific change should I expect to see? This does two things. First, it tests sincerity. Second, it moves the interaction from emotional reassurance to accountability. If behavior still doesn't change, the next step is not confrontation. It's consequence. That doesn't mean punishment. It means adjustment. You reduce availability. You change expectations. You stop extending trust without evidence, and you do it calmly. This brings us to the core defense principle that ties all 7 tactics together. It's called tactical emotional neutrality. This doesn't mean being cold, detached, or unkind. It means staying emotionally grounded when pressure appears, so you don't get pulled into someone else's emotional agenda. Manipulation relies on emotional spikes: guilt, urgency, fear, doubt, hope. Tactical emotional neutrality keeps your internal state steady, so you can choose your response instead of reacting automatically. Here are the tools that support this principle. The first is labeling. Labeling is simply naming what you observe without accusation. It sounds like this feels urgent to you. It seems like you're frustrated. Labeling lowers emotional intensity because people feel heard without you surrendering your position. The second tool is mirroring. Mirroring means repeating the last few critical words someone says, calmly and neutrally. So this has to be decided today? You feel like you're being taken for granted? Mirroring encourages the other person to explain, which often exposes pressure tactics without you pointing them out. The third tool is the "that's right" summary, used defensively. Instead of pushing your point, you summarize their position accurately and neutrally. Let me see if I understand. You're saying this needs to happen quickly. You don't want conflict, and you're worried about being left with the responsibility. When someone says, "That's right," emotional resistance drops. But here's the key. You still don't agree. You simply show understanding. Understanding is not consent. The final tool is silence. Silence creates space. It breaks urgency. It forces clarity. When you stop filling gaps with explanations or reassurance, manipulation loses momentum. Let's pause here. If this is changing how you think about influence, not as dominance, but as emotional clarity, comment blueprint below, so I know you're building this skill intentionally. Now take a step back and notice what all of this gives you. You don't need to expose manipulation dramatically. You don't need to accuse or label people as toxic. You don't need to win arguments. You only need to stay steady. When your emotional state is neutral, manipulation has nowhere to attach. In the next part, we'll put all of this into real-life scenarios, workplace, personal, relational, and walk through exactly how to apply these tools step by step. That's where everything clicks. Because awareness is powerful, but practice is what makes it automatic. Now, let's bring everything together. Not in theory, but in real situations where manipulation actually shows up. Because awareness is useful, but what changes your experience is knowing what to do in the moment, when emotions are active and the pressure is subtle. Let's start with a workplace scenario. Imagine you're in a meeting or on a call, and a coworker says something like, "I really need you to take this on. If you don't, the whole project might fall apart. I wouldn't ask if it wasn't urgent." Notice what's happening. There's urgency, a hint of guilt, and a quiet implication that if you say no, you're irresponsible. If you respond instinctively, you might over-explain. You might say yes just to avoid looking difficult, or you might push back defensively, which escalates tension. Instead, you slow the interaction and stay neutral. You could say, "It sounds like this feels time-sensitive." That's labeling. No accusation, just acknowledgement. Then you follow with a calibrated question. How would it make sense for me to take this on without clarity on priorities? Now the pressure shifts. You're not refusing. You're reclaiming structure. If they push again, there's really no time to think about it. You don't argue. You anchor yourself. "I'm not able to commit to this right now." No apology. No justification. If agreement follows without change later, strategic agreement, you move to behavior. What should I expect to be different by next week? And if nothing changes, you adjust your availability. Calmly. Now let's look at a personal scenario. Imagine a friend or partner says, "I guess I just always care more than you do," after you set a boundary. This is victim positioning mixed with guilt framing. The goal is emotional rescue. The instinctive response is reassurance. You want to explain, comfort, prove you're not a bad person. That's the trap. Instead, you label the emotion without stepping into responsibility. It sounds like this feels one-sided to you. Then you stop talking. If silence feels uncomfortable, that's okay. Discomfort doesn't mean danger. If they escalate, so you don't care, you ground yourself. "I do care, and I'm still comfortable with my boundary." That sentence does something powerful. It separates care from compliance. Now let's try a third scenario. Forced choice framing. Someone says, "So either you help me with this, or I'm completely stuck." Your brain wants to fix the situation. But first, you widen the frame. "I'm not sure those are the only options." Then pause, or ask, "What support do you have besides me?" You're not refusing help. You're refusing the false dichotomy. Across all these scenarios, notice what you didn't do. You didn't accuse. You didn't lecture. You didn't try to expose manipulation dramatically. You stayed calm. You named patterns. You protected choice. Now, let's make this practical. Think of one real situation coming up in the next few days. Work, family, or personal. Just one. Ask yourself 3 questions. What emotion is likely to be triggered? Guilt, urgency, doubt, or obligation? Which tactic might show up? What is one neutral sentence you can use to slow the interaction? You don't need the perfect response. You need a prepared one. Here's a simple influence challenge you can try this week. The next time you feel pressure to explain or rush a decision, pause for 2 seconds. Then respond with one calm sentence that either labels, slows, or reclaims choice. That's it. No confrontation, no overthinking, and pay attention to what happens. Not just to the other person, but to you. Notice how much steadier you feel when you don't abandon yourself to keep the peace. Quick pause here. If you know someone who's smart, capable, and constantly gets talked into things they don't want, share this video with them. It might give them language they didn't know they were missing. In the final part, we'll turn everything you've learned into a simple anti-manipulation blueprint you can remember under pressure. And we'll close with how to use these tools ethically, without becoming guarded or cynical. Because the goal isn't to shut people out. It's to stay clear, grounded, and in control of your own choices. Let's bring everything together into something you can actually remember, even when emotions are high. This is your anti-manipulation blueprint. Not a list of comebacks, not a personality change, just a clear way to stay grounded when psychological pressure shows up. Here are the 5 steps. First, notice emotional pressure before words. Manipulation almost never starts with logic. It starts with a feeling, guilt, urgency, doubt, or responsibility that doesn't belong to you. The moment you feel that internal pull to rush, rescue, or explain, pause. That pause is awareness returning. Second, slow the interaction. Pressure feeds on speed. Calm slows it down. You don't argue urgency. You introduce time. You don't debate emotion. You acknowledge it. One neutral sentence is often enough to change the entire tone. Third, name without accusing. Label what you observe, not what you suspect. It sounds like this feels urgent. It seems like you're frustrated. Naming emotion lowers intensity without surrendering your position. Understanding is not agreement. Fourth, reclaim choice. Manipulation narrows options. Clarity widens them. I'm not sure those are the only options. I'm comfortable with my decision. When you speak from choice, you step out of obligation. Fifth, watch behavior, not promises. Words are easy. Patterns tell the truth. If someone agrees but nothing changes, stop negotiating with language and adjust expectations instead. Consequences don't need drama. They need consistency. That's the blueprint. Now let's talk ethics, because this matters. Everything you learned here is defensive. It's about protecting consent, autonomy, and clarity. Ethical influence never relies on fear, guilt, or confusion. It doesn't make people smaller, so you can feel bigger. And resisting manipulation doesn't mean becoming cold or closed off. It means you stop abandoning yourself to keep interactions smooth. You're allowed to care and have boundaries. You're allowed to understand and disagree. You're allowed to pause without explaining yourself. If this video gave you even one phrase you're going to try this week, like the video. That small action helps this reach others who need it too. Now I want you to do something practical. Comment one real situation you're facing, work, friends, or relationships, and include one all-caps keyword that fits this topic, like boundaries, manipulation, or control. I read those, and they shape what I teach next. And if you want more calm, ethical, real-world persuasion tools, subscribe to the Influence Blueprint and turn on notifications. The next videos will build on this, so you're not just reacting to pressure anymore. You're choosing how you show up. You don't need to dominate conversations. You don't need to outsmart anyone. You just need clarity, steadiness, and language. And once you have those, manipulation stops being confusing and starts being visible. That's where real influence begins.